Hello, everyone, and welcome to another author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I am your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Quill and the Wandering Scribe. And welcome to another double author interview here on the channel. Now, this dynamic duo is incredible. One is a best-selling author, writer, director, and show creator living in LA, specializing in comedy, genre, and gaming for various media. He writes on Mystery Science Theater 3000. If you know that, it's incredible. I grew up watching that, so awesome. And Mystery Science Theater 3000 Live Tour. He has created, written, and directed many digital comedy series, including Nerd vs. Geek, Moot, Overanalyzers, and Society Why It's Wrong, and served as a writer and frequent collaborator on The Angry Video Game Nerd, Super Plumber Brothers, and Living in 8-Bit. His debut novel, Origin, book one of the cyberpunk space opera Parallax series, co-authored by his other partner in crime, and from publisher Atheon Books, recently became a #1 Amazon bestseller. And currently he's adapting a neo-noir video game property for TV, writing a tabletop RPG, and Emmy award-winning producer Jenny Powell, and co-writing a digital series with esteemed animation writer Jonathan Callan. Now, his partner in crime is also a best-selling writer and illustrator specializing in science fiction, fantasy, and genres. Her debut trilogy, the science fiction series Parallax, co-written by her partner in crime, as I mentioned before, debuted in April from Atheon Books and become a #1 Amazon bestseller, and currently has 4.6-star ratings on Amazon and Goodreads. Her dystopian short story, We Used to Fly, won a silver honorable mention for Writers of the Future, which I have myself been trying to get into for a very, very long time. If you don't know what Writers of the Future is, it's incredible. In the gaming realm, she is a co-star on the Actual Play podcast, Hella XP, and is developing 2 tabletop role-playing games, one based on the Parallax universe and one based on Stephen Perrow's comic book series, Stoker and Wells. She graduated from the University of Arts cum laude with a BFA in animation, and her 16-year zookeeping career culminated in being a polar bear keeper at the San Diego Zoo, and her life of animals and biology now influences all of her projects as well as her workplace comedy, Keepers. So, without further ado, let us give a huge round of applause and welcome to 2 first-timers here on the channel, Matt Conant and Lauren Cipollo. I hope I pronounced your guys' last names correct. Author of the Parallax series, which, if you remember this book, I got this at Anacon, and I plan to read it on the channel and give my first impression. So, Matt, Lauren, thank you so much for coming on the channel today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, pleasure to be here.
Whew, I must say, that is probably the best intro I probably have ever given to 2 or any of my guests on the channel. So you guys have done a lot. Is there anything else you guys haven't done in your lives?
Huh.
I mean, that's a lot of
There's many things we haven't done. But yeah, I mean, we're both from Philadelphia originally. So Lauren was in the University of Arts there and zookeeper there. I'm telling your bio instead of mine.
Maybe we'll just
yeah, there you go. And then that would probably be a lot faster. And then Lauren helped create a baby bear in Philadelphia.
I did. First sloth bear born at the Philadelphia Zoo in 20 years.
Wow.
And that's been back in like 2019, something, 2018, 2019.
Yeah. Pretty cool. And then, back into the arts world, and Lauren is now writing and illustrating and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Again.
Holy mackerel. Jeez. So,
I guess a lot of things there. But...
That's the most important things.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. Well, you guys have quite the pedigree, I must say. I mean, from writing, creating games, tabletop, like everything. So before we dive into your series, let's talk about you guys first. So how did you guys sort of meet and just like establish this incredible friendship?
You'll probably be very surprised that we met. We were friends for a while, but the friendship started to solidify during a Dungeons and Dragons campaign. Yes, we are
Okay, that makes
beginners.
sense.
So Matt was running a Dungeons and Dragons campaign, and it was the first time I had never played an RPG before. So I fell in love with RPGs doing that, and then we almost started writing then because I got so excited about the storylines that I would write these little like summaries, kind of like in prose as if I was writing the story. And so we would like read those as a recap at the beginning of the next session. So that's kind of sort of when the writing partnership started to happen. And then we've collaborated on a couple of things since then. Parallax, the series, actually started as an RPG. We were planning on making it an RPG. And then, so we had the world and we were creating all the splices and all that kind of stuff. And we got to we were testing out mechanics, got to the character creation part. I fell in love with a particular character that I created and I started writing and it kind of just blew up from there.
Yeah, suddenly Lauren had a short story about a character set in this universe, so the Parallax universe, which is basically like, I know we'll get to it, but like there's 12 sort of variants of humanity that have come about in the future as a result of corporations gene splicing their citizens to match the environments of planets that they come across, because that's the cheapest, most efficient way for them to do it. So Lauren had written a story about a character named Hemlock, who was a Signin, who was basically designed to heal a planet they had destroyed. The corporations had destroyed by the splice can pull energy out of mechanical devices and reintegrate it back into organic sources. So this became this cool story, and it was suddenly like 40,000 words, which is basically a novella.
Whoa.
Yeah.
And I was like, all right, and you were kind of like, I don't know what this is, I'm done with it now, or I'm not sure where this goes. And I was like, I don't want to force you to keep writing this, but if you want to, like, I have thoughts on what potential things we could talk about for Act 2 and Act 3 of this, and like, suddenly you had a novel and inspired me to write a novel as well, which was based on another part of the universe that I had started and sort of abandoned years earlier. But following Lauren's format, I was able to be like, oh, okay, this is how this can work. And then started writing another story and eventually realized the stories were similar enough that they could merge into one book series. And that is how Parallax happened.
Yeah, we kind of describe it as the worst way to write a trilogy.
Wow. Oh my goodness. And I must say, since you told me now that its origins based from tabletop games, which I must say, you guys are now probably the second group of authors who I've had on the show who have said that their stories came from a game or were inspired by games. One of my authors I had last week, Jessica Young, who writes Dragon, who wrote a Dragon trilogy, or not trilogy, but a series of Dragon novels based off of Aragon and DreamWorks Dragon Riders of Berk. Her genre of books focuses on leveling up in RPGs. That her book literally talks about, okay, how would leveling up XP and, of course, in RPGs, your whole aesthetic changes? How does that work? And I'm thinking, oh, that's really going to target the RPG like audience, and even like Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop. So the fact that you guys are now the second group that's done that, and I must say, if you had not told me that, I was just thinking this like came from the crevices of like science fiction. But I'm now very curious to read this because I myself got recently into tabletop Dungeons and Dragons. So I am really, really intrigued by that. And so now that kind of leads into the beginning questions of the interview, which is now the creation of the book. So I think you guys have already touched on this like a little bit just now, but when you guys decided to create a story from the campaigns of your tabletop game, Dungeons and Dragons, what was the desire you want to satisfy for your future readers?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. It was kind of at the time we started working on this, we were playing a Dungeons and Dragons game, and then that game kind of ended, and I shifted into running a sci-fi role-playing game and set it in the Parallax universe. So they were kind of two different things, but then the Parallax one, Lauren was the one who really took to that as like, this is cool. I'm in, this will be a cool story. And basically it was a matter of, I don't know that we were necessarily thinking about an audience yet. For me, it was sort of the pandemic, and I had been pitching a lot of TV shows and trying to sell shows to, various networks, and all of that kind of shut down during the pandemic. And everyone was like, we can't take, it's expensive to shoot during the pandemic. There are all these COVID regulations, and we're just not buying stuff from unknowns right now, or people with not that many credits, not the big names. So I was like, well, I had been writing scripts for TV for a while, and I was like, well, what if I just write something that I want to write, something that I will enjoy? Like, what would be the ideal project that isn't to any mandate, right?
Right.
And that kind of, for me at least, combined with this sort of looking at how society was going, and still is to some degree, to a large degree, in terms of like, I'd look outside at the beginning of the pandemic and I'm like, this is interesting. Like, everyone's kind of in this quarantine that they're not really thrilled about. We don't think it's going to last that long. And like, there were these mail trucks coming by every day, like society trying to continue as normal. And over the next couple of months, all of the mail trucks, the UPS trucks, everything got replaced by Amazon. It was just Amazon, Amazon, Amazon.
Yes.
And soon like 5 or 6 trucks a day from Amazon. And I'm like, this is a fascinating change. And it's not that wouldn't have happened without the pandemic, but I think the pandemic certainly spurred it on or sped it up. And so we kind of are just like this world of, to me, it was about the world. I always sort of build world start with the universe and then get to a character I like. And I think it's kind of the opposite, starting with a character and blowing it up.
Much like me.
Yeah, it's probably the smarter way to do it. But in my case, this occurred to me first, of just like this world where if governments just basically cede everything that they're doing to corporations, it's like, we don't need to regulate this anymore. We don't need to provide these services. The corporations are doing a fine job, and then those become the major powers that take to the stars first, as we're seeing in the space race as well, with NASA sort of ceding stuff to SpaceX and Blue Origin and everything else. So all of that was part of the inspiration as well. That was a very long answer. I'm sorry.
No, that was actually really, really perfect. And it is interesting when you think about that. Like, it also reminds me of like another book, another author who I had on the show, Guy Robbins, who wrote a book around the same time as you guys were creating Parallax, and it was called Lockdown. And the whole topic was a dystopian future is, what if the lockdown never ceased? What if it continued and got worse? How would society have survived? And it's set in like rural Scotland, and the world is just gone to hell. And it is really interesting. That's the thing I love about with like science fiction and like fiction in general, that there's a lot of stuff you can pull from reality to create a new story. And I think ultimately you got to find like a balance between, there are some things from reality that are in like fiction genres of every kind, but you don't want it to necessarily be, oh, this is exactly what's going to be like in the future. So that leads into the next question. So Matt and Lauren, when you guys were hatching out the first draft of Parallax, what was your promise that you guys agreed on for this story and for the next 2 books in the series?
I mean, it's such a great question because of the weirdly like haphazard way we wrote these books. So we kind of wrote 2 stories separately, and then kind of had to, playing cards, put all the stories together.
I see.
So there was a lot of like going back and like seeing how we can have these two stories connect. But so I think when we first started writing the books, we each kind of had our own promise that we were making while we wrote our books. And then we kind of had to go back and change that and say, you know, what is this overarching story that we're going to tell? And we want to make sure that whatever we start in book 1, we can make sure that we pay off at the end of book 3.
Right.
And I think we did a pretty good job. If you say so myself.
I mean, I think it's great.
Even in, you know, book 1, to give our readers, you know, our main characters have a couple problems, and some stuff is actually, you know, within each book of the trilogy, we tried to resolve a couple things along the way, so readers don't feel like they have to wait till the end of the whole trilogy to feel like they've gotten a payoff. So there's a lot of personal growth within characters that you'll see. They struggle internally with a lot of stuff. And then, you know, they all kind of are struggling with this larger external problem of the corporation. So I think, you know, when we first started the books, maybe we didn't quite know where that was. And then by the time we'd figured out what the trilogy was going to be together, we kind of wove this nice mystery that I feel like we did a pretty good job.
I think we looked at some common themes between the stories we were writing. Like, oh, actually, these are all everyone here is struggling with the same problem. Like, this is just a central problem and a bunch of sort of spores coming off of that, as it were, and like figuring out how they all link together and making sure it all feels like a cohesive story. And so far, we're really thrilled that everyone who's been reading it is like, yeah, this is doing it for me. It's working. So I know, because that was not the recommended way to write a novel. So we usually plan a lot better than that.
Nice. And that kind of leads into like the follow-up question. So after you guys, I have to imagine like hours of rewriting, hours of revisions, finding an editor to review it once, twice, thrice, and then finding a cover artist to really find the cover that's really going to be the selling point for the book, and you put it out on Amazon. What was the initial reaction like? Positive, negative, mixed? And when you guys first submitted it, is there one review that really stands out to you? It could be positive, negative, mixed, funny. Is there one?
We were really lucky. We are published through a smaller indie publisher, Athon Books. So their niche is kind of like sci-fi and fantasy. So through them, we were able to, they did our amazing covers. And it was funny. We were originally we were like, could we put characters on the covers first? And they were like, we can try it. And they did a version of that cover, and like no one liked it. We were like, no, this
Ooh, okay.
And not, you know, not
even
that it
we were
bad.
like, it was fine, but I could see why this won't be the thing people want to see on the shelf right now.
And then we were like, all right, what is like the main, you know, 3? We kind of have ships and you know, different things on our covers. We're like, what's the main thing in book 1? We're like, all right, the jump points, and then we have a space station, and then, you know, there's a chase in the last book. So we're like, those are the 3 things we want to have on the covers, and they did those covers, and they blew it out of the park. Like they're amazing. We love them. So all of that was wonderful. When we saw those covers, we were like, yes, you guys nailed it. But I honestly think we did send some ARC copies out before the book was published. So we did have some of our closer friends read the book for us, and we had, you know, a couple people that we didn't know. And I don't know, my favorite thing we had 2 of our friends who we actually were in another D&D campaign with, 2 of our close friends that live in
We promise we have a social life outside of role-playing. That's not true.
No, it's not true. They were really interested in reading the books, and they read them, and then we went over, you know, to play a game, and it ended up being like an hour of us just talking about the book together. It was before they even like wrote a review, and it was just like the coolest thing for me personally, that they were like, they picked, you know, they had a favorite character and they picked up on a certain thing. They're like, I want to know more about this. And that was just like the coolest thing ever. Cause I'm like, oh, it's like when you write a book and you're so in that universe, you're like, is anybody else going to get this as much as I do? And to like, at least know that like 2 other people got it.
Well,
really, you know, hit it right there.
No, totally. That was an amazing experience, and it was because we'd been in our own heads with this story for 4 or 5 years at that point, between writing 2 books, rewriting them as one series, reaching out, like the querying process, finding publishers or getting rejected by agents and things, and eventually finding a publisher, and then, you know, waiting for contracts and everything else, and then having to rewrite the books to make a trilogy. finally talking to some other human beings who had read the book, we're like, oh, good, we're not crazy.
Right.
We didn't spend all this time for nothing. People are really like getting this. And I think to me, my favorite reviews are the ones that I didn't realize it. A lot across the board, people have been calling this a character-driven sci-fi series and saying that that's what they've really been looking for this whole time. And a couple of people have compared it to like Mass Effect, which I love.
Wow,
I'm like
that's
so thrilled
huge.
about. I know. And I was like, does that work? Because I love Mass Effect and it is very character driven. Like people fall in love with these specific characters and these romance stories and this person, and you know, figuring out who lives and who dies in the game and stuff like that is really fun for people. And I know a lot of sci-fi kind of, even sci-fi I love, focuses so strongly on the world that the characters are kind of incidental. And to know that we didn't do that, that people love our characters as much as they love the world, and that it all feels lived in and works together. I think those are the reviews that make me happiest, personally.
That's great. And ultimately, I think that's what every author wants out of their book. And would you feel, looking back on the success of the first book and the series afterwards, that those reviews, those feedbacks have like validated your promise that you guys set out with the first book? Because I think that's always a big thing that a lot of authors are really worried about. It's like, is this going to hit the audience? Is my promise going to get through?
Yeah, exactly. It's, you know, it's the biggest thing that I think holds a lot of authors back, is that they're just worried that, you know, they poured their heart and soul into something, and like, is it going to mean something to somebody else? So
yeah, I think the reviews they've been very helpful to my own I don't know, sense that I'm doing this correctly in some way. Like if all our reviews came back and they were like, it was fine, or like, I really love the world, but I don't care about these characters, or I really love the characters, but the world I've seen before.
Yeah.
All of that would tell me something different. But the fact that this just helped me feel like we're doing this right in some way, and it wasn't just for us that we were writing it.
Yeah.
Right.
It's striking a chord with people who are longtime sci-fi fans, and also a few people who'd never read a sci-fi before, and this was their first sci-fi, and they got into it and they understood it. It wasn't too densely packed in like, you know, techno babble or something like that. That made me happy too. So
for sure.
Definitely. And again, it's like you kind of touched on something that is going to lead into probably one of few heavy hitter questions, what I think is important to discuss for any author, which I think you guys mentioned before, that when you guys were creating this book, it was right at the height of the pandemic, which I think a lot of authors really kind of decided to get our creative juices flowing during the pandemic, because everything was in lockdown. We couldn't go outside. We were stuck in our house, our apartments, or whatever. So we just had to write. And that was hours and hours of creating, drafting, revising, sending it out, spending money when we should have saved. But all of that, I think it's a risk. And I bring up this question, this thing, because every author, I think, always wants to like really get their foot in the door. They really read something that they really like. It's like, oh, I want to try my hand at this. Or people love like the short stories or like things you have done. It's like, oh, maybe I should do this. And of course, as you guys know, writing a book, it's like hours and hours, days, and in the case for you guys, years. I myself, same thing. Took me 5 years to get my debut novel. That was in the midst of college and graduate school, in the midst of everything. And then when you finally get it out there, you put on the digital stage, and there's that voice. There's that little voice in the back of your head telling you it's not going to do well. It's not going to sell. You're not going to hit the audience. And in some cases, that more or less comes true. You're not going to hit your target audience. And that comes back to what I like to talk about now recently, is your long-term goals of being an author, being a writer, which is, do you want to be a writer and an author, or do you want to be known as a writer and author? Because those are two very different things. And we'll probably talk about that later when we get to the business side of the interview. But ultimately, my question for you, Matt and Lauren, is that, have you ever had those moments of imposter syndrome in the back of your mind? And if so, or if not, what has continued to discipline you guys to tell this story? Because you know this story better than anyone else, and that if you do not write it, it's never going to be told.
Yeah, I mean, that is almost it. Like you,
Yeah.
I think that's one thing that keeps a lot of authors from publishing. Like, there's some crazy statistic where it's like 10% of people who want to write a book actually do, and then 1% of those people actually end up getting it published. So
Right.
there's a lot of things that hold people back from writing a book. And a lot of people, I think you're right, like did have time over the pandemic to write a book if they wanted to do it. Like that was the time to do it. And I do think a lot of people did, but then you have that next step where you're like, well, now I have to make it available for people. And, you had an excuse to write it. And now what's your excuse to, not put it up there? And I just don't know if we're just going to try and do this. And I think I started getting like the more rejections I got, the more like I lived off of the spite of it. I'm like, all right, well, you didn't like it, but that means I'm going to send it to like 5 more people and somebody's going to like this story.
Right. You'll feel sad that you didn't pick this up.
Right. Yeah. Later. So there's there was a little bit of that, but I think you just have to believe that your story is worth it. If you don't believe in your heart that this story is going to affect some other person, it's going to be real easy to give up, because it's years of finding someone and then if you're going to take it on and do it yourself, that's even more work that you have to do. And if you do go through the publishing route, that takes time and things are kind of taken out of your hands, and you just have to hope and that somebody's going to do their job.
And it's a lot of rejection in the meantime.
Yeah.
You are going to hear no. And and I know a lot of very, very talented artists in the film world, in the writing world, in the actual like fine art world, everywhere, who are just like, they don't put their stuff out in the world because they don't want to hear a no, or that their thing isn't good. And I'm like, they're more talented than me in a lot of cases, but just that fear of rejection really can be it can be your worst enemy. So you just have to be like, I live for the no now. I want to get this out. Tell me no. Just let me cross you off the list, and I'll move on to the next thing. And and if you gamify it, and just don't take it personally.
Yeah. That's part of I know a lot of people who like, they have a list and like, I get 10 no's and then I buy myself an ice cream or something, like they just make it so that
punch cards, like every 10 no you get a free ice cream.
And I think it just helps you, like, but you did it, you made that effort and you kept going even though somebody said no to you. But and I will say, we're lucky. I feel personally like having a partner is helpful. I know there's a lot of people who are out there doing it by themselves and they don't really have someone to commiserate with, to kind of talk to, war game things out.
Yeah.
So that also, I think, helps a lot, is just to have someone with you through it.
Yeah, for sure. And just to brainstorm, just to like, is this a good idea or is this terrible? Like, do we work on this or do we put it down? Do we work on something else?
Definitely. And that kind of now leads into what I've now added, which is the business side of being an author, which I love now talking about this out of all the questions in my interview, because before I never used to talk about the business side, but more recently, I think it is important to have these business discussions because it does offer perspectives and a window into the publishing world, marketing world, and everything. So let's talk about that. So, of course, you guys have mentioned that your books are published with a small indie publisher, Atheon Books. But I'm wondering, when you guys finally got it ready, you had at least the draft, you had it edited, maybe not the cover yet, because you had an idea of what the cover was, but you didn't know what it was going to look like. Did you want to go the indie publishing route because you want to have more control over your story in terms of like the creativity, making sure it's authentic to not only the story that you create, but also to yourselves as writers and authors? Or did you want to try your hand at the traditional publishing world?
Well, this is it's really funny how close it was. It was like right on the bubble. You have,
really
one of those books up there.
Oh yeah.
So we were about probably we had been querying for probably 6 months, and we went as far as creating a little different cover and like going to as far as like Kindle direct press or whatever, and like being like, if we self-publish it, this is what it's going to look like. And you can see this has like the not for resale. This is the old cover, and they like don't print, like we never actually printed it independently.
Okay.
Yeah, but we got as close as like ordering ourselves 3 copies to look at and be like, this is a book. Maybe this is where it goes.
Yeah.
And then we started, it just happened that was the same week or month that we started getting responses from some indie publishers.
Yeah.
And managed to find one that we really liked to work with. So we didn't have any specific thought we wanted to go with a traditional publisher. I know there are advantages to both. Maybe we'll see what happens with the next series. Who knows? We're really happy with Athon and working with them.
I feel like they're a little bit the best of both worlds. I know, because I've talked to a lot of self-published authors who are like, I do it because I want to control it. It's the product that I'm definitely I've made all the decisions, and Athon's kind of nice. They're not, we had an editor through them, but they weren't like, we're going to have you rewrite your entire story. They were, they helped us along, and they made sure that things made sense, but it wasn't a huge, like, we're going to get in there and massage your story. And we were again, really lucky with the covers, because they like really did a really great job, and we didn't have to really talk about it other than to say that we loved it. So I do think, so if you go, big publishers, they might have a little more, they're going to have a little more control over what you're doing. And then self-publishing, you have all the control. And then if you're having, going direct to a publisher, it's kind of in the middle somewhere. So there's pros and cons to it. You just have to decide what feels good for you.
Definitely. And I've always talked about this on the show, is whatever road you decide to go, indie or traditional, just always be mindful and do a lot of research. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that a lot of new authors really don't do. I myself almost was susceptible to vanity publishing. The contract was really good, but I did a little more research, and there was a little clause at the bottom. I'm not going to say the press, but if you know, because I've mentioned them before with another friend of mine. It was where I had to give up full creative rights over to them. It's like, no, I'm not doing that. And unfortunately, my friend got snubbed by a subsidiary of them, and she actually had to go to court and win the full rights of her book. And she had to make a second edition, which, as she says, is the true edition. So there's a lot of things that a lot of authors, new authors, really have to consider, where if you go traditional publishing, just be mindful of, this is like a legit publishing house and not like vanity publishing. And if it is traditional publishing, great, but just be mindful of this. Traditional publishing is a business. They're trying to sell a product. If your product does not sell, they will axe you. And that is the hard truth. Indie publishing, you have more creative control, but it's all out of pocket. Marketing, editor, cover artist. For me, I think I've spent almost $400, almost like, I want to say like $800 for like one book. And that's just the editing, and that's just the cover art. And it's like, it's expensive, but if you can manage the finances, you'll be fine. And that in turn goes back to, again, your long-term goals, and also the mentality of being an author, which one of my guests said there's two kind of brains for an author: the artist and the businessman. The artist's sole existence is to create the product. The businessman comes out when the product is done, and now you have to sell it. And I'm still struggling with that. I'm still teeter-tottering, like, how do I market this? And this, in course, goes into the audience, which is another important discussion, which is fine-tuning your audience. Now, everyone I've had on the show says, we write the books for ourselves because this is the book that we've wanted to read. We also have to be mindful, okay, we're writing the books for ourselves, but if we're putting it out there in a genre, we have to understand the audience that we're writing for. If it's science fiction, it's this genre, it's this audience. If it's fantasy, it's this audience.
Mhm.
And if you're gonna be real hardcore in those genres or any other genres, you're trying to zero in on the hardcore niche in that, where if it's like a sub genre. So for you guys, how important was it to really understand your audience for Parallax and the other two books in the trilogy?
I think, and like I'm gonna asterisk that and get back to it because you made a great point about indie versus publisher and audience there too. And it was like when we were deciding whether to go with an indie press or a big press or a self-publish. I've done a lot of work in film, much more work in film and TV than I have in publishing. This is our first attempt at publishing at all. And I've been working as an independent filmmaker for decades, is how old I am. And most of that was like, yeah, full creative control. You could do whatever you wanted with it. But who will see it? Only your friends and family and the people who, if something happens to go viral, and every time something went viral or reached beyond our core audience, it was totally a different project than the one I would have expected it to be. It was never the thing that felt like it should go viral. I was like, I hope people see this one, and that one gets 70 views. But then something else gets 500,000 views that you're not expecting. And so eventually I was like, this is great, but I also want to try experimenting with the studio system. And that's in part why I moved from Philadelphia to Los Angeles. So just like, let's see, I'm willing to give up a little bit of creative control here and hear some other people's input if it means I can reach a greater audience. And so that's become a little bit like I've done both, and I'm open to both in pretty much any project I work on. But I always like sort of trying to see if we can reach as wide an audience as possible, or as, like you said, honed in niche audience for a specific genre before I'm like, all right, I can do this myself, and now I guess I'm going to. Let's do it the indie way. So anyway, that was kind of not the answer to the question you just asked, but it was a thing you.
But actually, is true, because you did kind of answer in a way, because in, like, you know, the whatever audience you're trying to go to, like indie or traditional, you always have to be mindful of like the audience you're trying to go with. Now, of course, the publisher wants to get the big audience, the wide audience, but you may be focusing on maybe like a few hundred in like dystopian science fiction or dystopian fantasy. And ultimately, you know, as we talked about earlier, it's a hit or miss. You may not get the target audience that you want, but, and we'll probably go on to this a little bit later, you may find yourself getting a new audience that you did not anticipate. So before we go on to the next question, Lauren, was there anything you wanted to add to this question?
No, I think, Matt hit it. It's really, you know, you kind of are depending on. There, I'm gonna leave it. You did fine. I
did fine. All right, I passed. So
all right. Now the next side of being the business, which one guest of mine mentioned, is if you're going to write, for every first-time author who wants to write in any genre that they want, it's always good to read the books in that genre to see what are the common themes, what do people like, what do people dislike, and not try to imitate, copy, or just be like a knockoff of like a book, but you wanted to invoke the same feelings. Like, as you guys said, that this book reminded people a lot of Mass Effect, which is huge. So for you guys, when you guys were crafting the story, who are the authors or books that helped you sort of create the narrative style, the character development, the world building, all the while still keeping true to your authorial voice or creating your authorial voice?
It's such a great question. And it's funny that people bring up Mass Effect, because I'm a huge Mass Effect fan. But I discovered it like 20 years too late. I played it very, very recently, and after we wrote this trilogy. Like we had written this trilogy, and then I played Mass Effect, and I was like, oh, this is obviously a thing that I love. But I've always been like a huge fan of science fiction. But I just think every book that I've read any science fiction that I liked, it's always like I'm super duper character focused. Like it's very easy. Like once I started writing, I was like, oh, that's the part of this that I really like. I almost discovered it like as I was writing. So, some of my favorite like science fiction, like I'm going to name probably more shows than I will books right now, but like The Expanse is a great one. Lost and one of my favorite books is Jurassic Park. I read that book when I was like 12 and I read it a billion times. So, I've always kind of had that action, science fiction kind of love, but then there was always a character involved with it as well. So it was just kind of fun to almost discover like those are the kinds of things that I love. My most recent faves of science fiction authors are Andy Weir. I really enjoy, like, he just always he has a cool world and he does a lot of science stuff, but he always has like a fun character. Like his main character is always kind of smarmy and, they always kind of have a good personality. So I really like his stuff. If anybody,
this is The Martian and
he wrote The Martian and if you like audiobooks, I should be talking about my own book, but I'm going to promote this guy for some reason. $30, he says movie pro.
He's
fine,
but
the audiobook of Project Hail Mary is one of the best audiobooks I've ever listened to. So if you like that kind of character, there's a fun character and a cool concept, he's great too. So that's what I find myself recently being drawn to, is something where I love a good sci-fi world, but I need that character to like anchor me in it.
Nice. How about for you, Matt? Were there any other books that really helped you, or even like shows, games that really helped you as well?
Oh, absolutely. Like everything. And I think I would love to see someone who reads Origin or the Parallax series and loves it, like just make a list of like influences. You can probably see them in there because they're just pieces. I don't think anything's a ripoff, but I think a lot of it is influences for sure and homages and stuff like that. So I'm a huge Larry Niven fan. I read Ringworld many years ago and loved it, and a lot of those concepts stuck with me. I was fortunate enough to take a class at Temple University taught by Samuel Delany, who is a prominent sci-fi author of like the 70s, and he wrote a book called Dahlgren, but Babel 17 is one of my favorite really stories of ages.
Okay.
And it's all about language and communication and stuff, so there's a lot of that type of thing in Parallax, not to give too much away. William Gibson is one of my favorite authors ever. He is one of the founders of the cyberpunk movement. So there's a lot of cyberpunk elements in this too. And, all of the usual, I love in movies and TV, Lost for sure, but X-Files, Alien, Blade Runner, all of that stuff, even like Event Horizon and something, Independence Day, like these things were just like I grew up with and loved and are silly. There's not a lot of Independence Day in this, but it's just like you can have very heady science fiction that's fun, and you can also have like very stupid science fiction that's fun. And I think we tried to make like a space adventure that people could enjoy regardless. So I think all of that's in there somewhere.
Nice. And honestly, I completely agree. For me, like for my own stories, I'm a big Assassin's Creed fan, so I love combining history with science fiction. And I even kind of wrote my own Assassin's Creed story, which is set during World War II, where Nazi Germany is the dominant force. And apparently he is so evil now that the Templars and the Assassins have to work together. And I wrote that with a friend of mine who was a fellow Assassin's Creed nerd and a fellow author from South Africa. Shout out to Kim Appledren. But yeah, I 100% agree. Like we always get inspired by a lot of things around us that help motivate us, which leads me to something that I used to say on the show, which I then changed, which was I was at a conference many years ago when I want to say just out of high school, entering my first year of college, which was an author conference at my local library, and the author said this, and I kid you not, this were her exact words: writers are liars, cheaters, and thieves. We make stuff up, we cheat people out of time, and we always steal from each other because the same story has been told numerous times. And I believe that for a long time, but as I've gotten older and I've sort of found my footing, still finding my footing to find place in the author world, I've changed that to where I like to call it the 3 E's: educate, entertain, and enlighten. And I feel you can do that with like any book. And with those 3 E's, your readership is definitely going to notice that and definitely relate to that. When I wrote my first book, I initially was writing for the historical fiction, fantasy, and sci-fi. It was kind of like, I call it a mutt because it really didn't belong to any genre. And I was surprised by the readership who really enjoyed it. It wasn't so much the fantasy or science fiction, it was the history. And there wasn't that much history in it. And so my question for you guys, when you guys were hatching out this story in this series, did your ideal reader change from what you expected to now seeing it with a different perspective?
Maybe. So I'm gonna tell you a story, and this may not answer the question, but it was something that really, like, something completely unexpected. So we were really lucky. We do have audiobooks of the series, and our audiobook narrator was able to live record the second and the third book on TikTok. And
Amy Hutchins, by the way, she's amazing.
Love her so much. So so people were able to, she'd do a recording session, 3 or 4 hours a night, and people could just drop in and listen. And it was, she was working, so she'd go back and whatever, but you basically got to listen to an audiobook. And she kind of has like her little fan base. Like, they're really more there for Amy than they are for the books that she reads. But they enjoy the read. They enjoy them. And it was so hilarious because this group of people were listening to our books, and they were like, we've never listened to this is like our first science fiction, because Amy usually does like fantasy,
okay,
or like romance books. So this was one of her very, like, she had done some science fiction, but this was one of the first that she had done on TikTok. And they got into it, and we were like, we didn't even know, like, this was like a section of people who were really like fantasy and romance readers that were like, wow, this is science fiction. This can be science fiction. We love this book. And so we thought we were writing a book for science fiction people. We're like, nobody who doesn't listen to science fiction is going to want to read this book. And we were wrong. We definitely pulled some people in who hadn't listened to it before. So we're like, wow, if we can figure out how we're bridging this gap, that's amazing, and maybe they're the 5 people who are the only
right.
5.
Just them.
But that was really cool to see. Like, we really thought we were kind of writing for a science fiction audience, but to find out that it was accessible enough for people who may be a little afraid to start science fiction. Yeah. It would be a good starter book for them.
Yeah, I think so. I have trouble with some fantasy and science fiction if it's too terminology heavy or too many like proper nouns or whatever right up front, where you've got all of these characters and cities and whatever planets that you have to have, that it's just peppered in so frequently you're like, I'm lost on its page 3. So we definitely tried to avoid that, but we wanted it to feel natural to the characters. And I think the fact that we wrote this book in a very tight third-person perspective. So every chapter is from one character's point of view, and it's clear whose point of view it is. So if it makes sense to the character and you're in their brain, it kind of, where it seems like it makes sense to the reader now. And we're happy that works. Because I think one of our first drafts, we started it much more omnisciently, like we're just looking down on this situation, and maybe it's too broad. And as we wrote more and more, we got tighter and tighter into the characters' heads. And I think that's why, maybe that's my best guess as to why it might be connecting with people outside of sci-fi. It's like, oh, this is a person. Yeah. And this person, they're 300 years in the future, but they're worried about their job, or they're worried about how they're going to, make money, how they're going to survive. This person's an orphan. They're wondering what's happening to their family. Like, this stuff is stuff I can connect with. And then the world just sort of washes over you as you do that.
Yeah. It was a nice thing that I feel, we gave our characters very, like, not modern day, but just, relatable problems. Their inner problems were very relatable. So then the outside problem, which was a little more science fiction, I think people could kind of get a handle on, because they're like, well, I understand that this guy's upset about he can't find his wife. But also there's this weird corporation thing happening over here. So we drew people in.
Nice. And honestly, that's actually very similar to my first duo that I had on the channel. Desiree Proctor and Erica Hall, authors of the graphic novels comic Nuclear Power by Fanbase Press. And when they created that comic, from what they told me, they were trying to get, people who, love the mutants, love science fiction, loved alternate history. Surprisingly, their audience also included people who grew up during the time at the height of the Cold War, and specifically those who grew up during the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. And they did not expect that. And honestly, that's the most beautiful thing about being an author. Or I say one of the most beautiful things about being an author is that your readership could be vastly different. And ultimately, it's incredible because, as you guys said, you guys were able to get an audience of readers who had not read science fiction whatsoever. So this was their first introduction, which is incredible. And then now leading into probably the most heavy hitter question I have. So I'm going to lay down some context for this question. So a year ago, I had a guest on the show named Natalie Wright, author of Season of the Dragon. I met her at the LA Festival of Books, which is something that I've been trying to get into for a very long time, but that's another discussion entirely. But when I had her on the show, she told me that Season of the Dragon was her 7th book, not her first. And then she dropped a pearl of wisdom, which I have now taken to heart, and I've now loved telling it to a lot of other authors and getting their feedback on, which is there is no guarantee that your debut novel is going to be the start of your legacy. Now, I have met an exception to that. One author who I had, Andy Peliquin, his debut novel skyrocketed him to award-winning status and allowed him to live off his royalties to make 3 more series of books in the fantasy, the hardcore fantasy and dark fantasy genre. But on the off chance, you have authors who rise up, fall, rise a little bit higher, fall, and that voice of imposter syndrome comes back. And then, of course, comes back to the long-term goals. What did you want to be? Did you want to be an author, or did you want to be known as an author? Which then relates to another thing that we haven't talked about, which is the clicks and the trends in the publishing industry. Because there's everything happening in the publishing industry. Everything's dragons, everything's romance fantasy, which I now realize is probably the most read genre in the book publishing world. And everyone wants a piece of that. Everyone wants to try to write for that. And 9 times out of 10, you're not going to hit that market. And even if you do reach it, you've already missed it. And again, that voice of imposter syndrome comes back. So my overall question for you guys, Matt and Lauren, in your opinion, with everything that you've learned, not also just in the publishing, but also in like the media world, TV, film, games, and other projects, how important is it for any creator in any of those fields to understand that their debut anything, it's not going to be the start of their legacy, but it should not deter them from pursuing it if it is indeed their passion?
Yes. That is the most important thing for them to understand. Like I like that question. Do you want to be a writer? Or do you want to be known for it? Or do you want to be an author? And I kind of am like, well, I want to be a writer. I want to write. That's what I want to do. It's not really important to me that something that I make is super duper popular. That'd be great. Like I'd love that. But my goal is I want to be able to write all the time and not have a day job like I currently do right now. So like that would be the dream. And whether that's writing novels, whether that's writing for TV, whether that's writing for RPGs, whatever it is, I feel like I would love to do any of those things. And because we're doing all of those things, I feel like it's a little bit easier for me to kind of live in that world, because I'm like, well, we wrote these books, they're doing really well. I'm not living off of it yet. So, I'm going to go work on this other thing now too. And we talk about it all the time, where it's like, distract yourself with the next project. Because if you think about, we have these books out right now and we're like, should we be promoting them? What should we do? Are they doing good enough? just distract yourself with the next project. And you're
Right.
always creating and you're always doing something, because you're right. The first thing that you do, it could be the thing that makes you super famous, but you're right. Like, it's probably not going to be.
Yeah, and I think it's common, especially in the film world, for people to be like, look at that guy, where did he come from? Like, Pedro Pascal is the new, like, he just came out of nowhere. And it's like, he's been a working actor for 20 years, 30 years probably.
Right.
And like, people just heard of him now, but it took, it was his 20th thing or 30th thing or 50th thing or 100th thing, who knows, like that was the one that put him on the radar of the general public. And until then, he was like everybody else. And a lot of artists that I know who you just are trying to get to the next project with this one.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think imposter syndrome is a part of that. You never know when you have made it, like what is actually success. Is it just
right?
That's a hard question to answer.
Yeah, I have no idea. I also just I want to write. I like telling stories, and whether that's a story in game form, whether it's a story in book form or TV form or film or something else, who knows what else there will be. That's the part I enjoy. And then if people hear of it, great. And if they don't, on to the next one, I guess, because I can't shut off that part of my brain.
Right.
So.
Yeah, it's been great working with this one. Like, Matt's been writing longer than I have, and when we started working together, he was always like, if it ever stops being fun, don't do it. Like, don't do something that's gonna make you miserable. So, and it's, it's hard. I'm not saying this is an easy thing to do, and it does take a lot of work, but it's always been fun. So I just keep doing it. So I would always tell authors, like, if this is making you miserable, if this is really something that's hurting you to do, then don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
And it's okay. Like, you're not a failure. Nothing bad happened. It's just do it because it makes you happy. And then, hopefully those other things will follow.
Yeah. Or like, if it's work, it's paying you. Like, if it's neither paying you nor fun.
Right.
And it's you're not learning anything new, then why are you doing it? You're
Yeah.
just making yourself miserable for no reason.
Right.
Do something else.
Absolutely. And you kind of actually brought up a really good thing, Lauren, that another guest on my show had said last week, which is, if it's going to cause you pain or if you're going to lose joy from it, then don't do it. Don't do it as a work. Just do it as a hobby. You can and do it as a hobby and still do something that works, pays the bills. Because I think every first-time author, they want to be the next George R. R. Martin or J.K. Rowling or C.S. Lewis, and that doesn't come overnight. Depending on the person, it's different. But majority, it's not going to be an overnight success. As one author did say on my show, which I think is important, which is grit trumps talent. Doesn't matter if you're the best writer. Doesn't matter if you can create the best characters. Doesn't matter if you have the best world building. If you cannot go through the fires and the flames, little Dragon Force reference, you cannot go through the hurdles and the obstacles that every other writer and author goes through, then you shouldn't be in this field if you're not going to accept the consequences. But if you are, then you can achieve, because grit transforms into talent. And that's how we grow as writers, as authors, in TV, film, games, whatever industry you're in. Grit will always lead to talent. And also, it's always good to have a partner in crime or a small group of people that have really been by your side from the get-go. Which then leads into my next two questions before the final question of this interview. So, for you guys, Matt and Lauren, who have been your biggest supporters on this journey of yours? And it could be individual journeys as like RPG writers, film media, whatever. And have you guys gotten a sense of validation from other indie authors or authors in general who have picked up Parallax and have said that this is incredible? Because I definitely feel like in any industry, when you go in with everything that you learn and wanting to learn more, you want to show the people, I can do this. And that's incredible. And then it's another feeling entirely when your peer sees your work, they see what you're doing and they recognize it and they give credit where credit is due.
Yeah, for sure. I don't want to get like super mushy or anything, but But this guy is kind of one of my definite biggest supporters. Like like you said, I went to school for animation. Like creativity and art and writing has kind of been something that I've done on and off throughout my life. But then more recently, I've seriously wanted to go back. I was in zookeeping for a long time. That's very not creative. It's a wonderful career and I had a great time, but I missed creativity. I missed being able to do those kinds of things. And I was like, oh, it's too late. Like I've been not doing this for long enough and I don't think I can do it again. And Matt was like, no, that's not true at all. You can 100% do this, and has kind of helped me remember that. And that was really helpful. I mean, I have the support of my family too, of course. They've all been wonderful. But I have to point out that I joined TikTok a year ago or something. They have a really great indie author community over there. It's like one of the nicest places on social media I've ever been. Social media can be terrible.
Yes.
But over there, that kind of indie author community, they're so supportive. So many people have picked up Parallax and they've given us reviews and they're just wonderful. So that has really been it's just something that I, again, didn't expect. I didn't expect this group of people who are also trying to make it, we're all just in the same place, clawing our way, trying to get people to buy books, and they've all just been wonderful and supportive. So that was a wonderful thing that I discovered recently and really appreciate.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously the same in terms of Lauren having been the reason that Parallax probably came to fruition when it did. I had written a script 10 years earlier and it sat on a shelf, and it wasn't until I started running the role-playing game that there were a bunch of players playing it, and most people were like, yeah, okay, this is fine. This is interesting, and I'll play this game. And Lauren was like, no, I am in this. I will play this game, and helped me see the potential of it. To where we were able to build it into a mutual universe together. So obviously Lauren has been the primary source of, anytime I have a sci-fi idea or a fantasy idea, she's able to be like, ooh, what if this, what if that, and how about if we do it this way, and this character would be fun, and someone in it, and that's just amazing. And then beyond that, we were lucky, like Lauren said, we had some advanced readers for Parallax who were just friends of ours, mostly people we knew, people who like reading, some people we found on social media who were like, I'll read the book, but many of our close friends, and I don't even want to start naming them because there will be too many and I'll leave someone out. But some of them are also established sci-fi authors and things like that who read it and they're like, yeah, this is good. I really enjoyed this read. And I was, kind of shocked and flattered to hear that, not because I didn't think it was good, but because they have a lot more experience than we do in some situations. And so to hear that from established professional writers that this worked for them was nice and helps us want to keep going with it. So
100%. I absolutely agree. And just like yourselves, on Instagram, I did not realize there was a lot of indie authors on Instagram. And for all my viewers who are hearing this for the first time, a majority of my authors who I've had this month, last month, and the month before have all been on Instagram. I just see their profiles ooh, that book looks interesting. I want to have this person on my show. And they're great. A lot of them are in the same boat as me. They're either creating their story that's coming out later this year, they just published their novel, or they're on their second, and it's incredible. And yeah, Lauren, as you said, social media can be a negative place, but it is nice when there's a diamond in the rough where you can just meet a bunch of people who enjoy the same thing as you do, who are in the same boat as you guys, and just interactions and just being there for each other's success, because that's what we want to be for our fellow authors. We want to be there for each other's success. We want to give credit where credit is due. We want to check out everyone. We want to support everyone. And ultimately, we learn a lot from our fellow authors where it comes to oh, maybe you should do this for your characters, or maybe you should do this for your next book, or here's a new idea for a next book. All of these things help us grow as authors and as people, which now leads to the final question of this amazing interview, which is, okay, Matt and Lauren, with everything that you guys have learned as writers, authors in the film world, media, game, everything you guys have experienced up to this point in your life, what is your word of wisdom to fellow creators who want to get into the industry? And that could be books, games, film, media, anything.
You can go. This is a hard.
I told you it was a heavy hitter.
Yeah, it's not terribly original, but I would say just start doing it. Like you have to, if you want to be a writer, you have to write. There's a lot of people who, I have a very small following, but I have people who come up to me at conventions or something and they're like, you write for Mystery Science Theater? I want to write for Mystery Science Theater. How do you do that? And I'm like, well, you have to do it. Like, you have to write first, like, so that people know that you're funny or you're good at it or whatever, and then they will want to hire you for the thing that they're doing. So, same with publishing. If you haven't written anything, no one's going to know you're a good writer. You could think you're the best writer in the world, but put it out into the world, and it may take 20 or 50 or 100, short stories, something, before anyone notices one of them. But if it's if it's not fun, don't do it, because there are a lot of easier ways to make money than trying to claw your way into any of these industries. So you really have to enjoy what you're doing. And then if you're enjoying it, you're never really working. Yeah. It's just fun. You're hanging out.
I agree. It is fun, and it's like, realize that it is work too. Like the one thing that I guess I would say is that don't close your mind off to learning. Like you're going to have something in your heart. You're going to work really hard and you're going to put it out there, and maybe people read it and they immediately love it. But more likely you're going to, send it out to a couple readers first and they're going to have opinions. And you just need to be okay. Like, you need to understand that there's going to be people who have opinions, and then maybe if you hear the same opinion enough, maybe that's something that you need to look at again. And don't be offended by it, and don't, you're not the worst writer. You're learning and you're growing. And with every book and every script that I write, I get better. I'm never going to be the best that I can be. Like, I'm always going to be better. And I'm always going to look back at the first thing that I wrote and be like, ooh, I could have done that better. But that's good, because that means you're growing. So, you need to be able to kind of have that thick skin to be able to push forward where it's going to seem rough, and always be willing to grow.
Absolutely. And another thing to add also onto that is one thing that an author in my past on my Anchor podcast, when it was just audio, no video, which was never tie your work to your self-worth. Never connect those two, because as you said, Lauren, just now, you get people who make reviews, and sometimes they're going to be good, sometimes they're going to be bad, and sometimes they're going to be just worse, where they're going just to be awful and just target you. And that unfortunately does happen, and it is sad and unfortunate, but you should never tie your work to your self-worth as a person. It is a project. It is something that you are learning, and you will continue to grow. You can take constructive criticism, but never ever take bad reviews to the heart as a reflection of you. Never do that, because, as I said on before, no one knows your story better than you. You create it. You get to tell how it ends. Yes, you want to share it with people, but at the end, you're creating this story because this is a story that you want to read growing up. And honestly, at the end, what more could you ask? And here we are, listeners, at the end of this amazing double author interview here on the channel. I want to thank my guests, Matt and Lauren, for coming on the show and promoting Parallax. Make sure to check this out. I'll provide the link down below to purchase it, as well as be on the lookout for my episode reviewing the first few pages or chapters of Parallax. So, Matt and Lauren, thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you very much. Where can people find and engage with you on social media? And do you have any upcoming projects that you would like to make announcement for that are coming up in the future?
Sure. You can find me on Instagram. I am at Medic Linden, and then I'm on TikTok at Lauren Writes Stuff. And I have a link tree in my bio, so any other socials that you may want to find me at are all in there. Upcoming projects, we have the third book in the Parallax trilogy is going to release June 11th. So we're excited about that. And then the audiobooks for books 2 and 3 should be coming out soon after that. We don't have release dates exactly, but that's the biggest thing that I can think of right now.
Yeah, that's the big one right now. Still this release is still fresh to us, so that's what we'll plug. As for me, I am online as Cinevore. My company is Cinevore Studios, like a creature that consumes film. Cinevore. So Cinevore.com. And most social media I'm on is either Cinevore or Cinevore Film, and you can find me there, all those places. So, but thank you so much for having us.
Thank
This
you.
was
This was
awesome.
it was so
really
much fun.
Yeah.
You're welcome, Matt. You're welcome, Lauren. I will link all those down below in the description of this video. And I hope you've all enjoyed this second double author interview. Who knows if a lot of you like these kind of interviews? Comment down below, and who knows? I may get a few more authors on the channel who co-write a book, and we'll just go from there. But until next time, this has been the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out, asking you to like, subscribe, and comment down below. And again, a huge thank you to Matt and Lauren for coming on the show. And I wish them the best of success with Parallax. And hopefully, I may have them again on the show to talk about the third book coming out. Who knows? Or maybe a new project entirely. We'll just have to wait and see. But until next time, viewers and listeners, it's been the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out. And until next time, have a wonderful day.